Freedom is the right to tell what they do not want to hear. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. Tired of the same repetitive government narratives? Then wave goodbye to the distractions and rhetoric of corporate media. For this is Anti-Media Radio.
But I want to get the language right. The big government is in trouble.
You're all a bunch of slaves! Bunch of slaves!
What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another.
What's your definition of media?
And now, here's your host, S.M. Gibson.
It is June the 18th, 2015, and my name is S.M. Gibson. This is Anti-Media Radio, your alternative to the corporate media's agenda and their fear-mongering. Absolutely wild day. Things are getting hot everywhere. As the whole world is aware of by now, we've had a terrible tragedy and shooting in Charleston, South Carolina, among other things. We'll get into all that tonight here in just a second. I'm going to start the night off like I do every episode by letting everyone know that there have been 527 Americans killed by police officers so far this year. On the flip side of that, there have been 56 police officers that died in the line of duty, but 14 were by gunfire. So only 14 of the 56 were by gunfire. We have also had 1,149 people shot in the city of Chicago with their wonderfully strict gun control laws. We have seen today, as a matter of fact, in the wake of the shooting, Obama coming out and not so subtly ramping up again for gun control laws. You know, we've heard this a lot with the multiple shootings that have occurred over the past few years, and he's still yet to take anybody's guns. But, you know, they act like the gun control laws work, and the numbers tell you completely differently. 1,149 people shot in the city of Chicago and 201 homicides since the beginning of the year. And there have been 100 people beheaded in our great ally, Saudi Arabia. So we are still supporting that behavior as well in this country. Something I came across a little bit earlier today that I think is absolutely huge news. First off, for those of you who also have not heard, the TPA passed today in the House. What that is basically is it's the fast track. It's the Trade Promotion Authority, and what it is, it's fast track and gives Obama. He doesn't have to negotiate with Congress to pass through the TPP. And for people that don't know what that is, it's kind of a modern day NAFTA. There's going to be a lot of jobs lost in this country, and there's not a lot of laws or not a lot of jobs still here. It passed 218 to 208, and you know that you should be terrified when the Republicans and Obama are agreeing on something. So that happened today in the House. But something that I have not heard mentioned anywhere is today of all days, and the famous quote is, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." Rahm Emanuel is famous for saying that. 1:46 p.m. Eastern Time, the United States Senate passed the 2016 NDAA. Today of all days, with all the distractions going on in the mainstream media, and not to say that the shooting is a distraction, because that is a terrible tragedy, and that is a serious story that should be discussed. But while that's going on, the Senate passes the NDAA today for 2016. For those of y'all who do not know about the NDAA, it grants permission to the United States government, along with many other things, to indefinitely detain United States citizens. Indefinitely detain United States citizens. Ben Swann, who was in Truth and Media and with RT and with among a bunch of other people, actually questioned Obama on this a few years ago, and his response famously was, yeah, we know it's there, but I'm not going to use that power. I'm not going to use that authority. So that's terrifying that they're telling you we can indefinitely detain you, but we're not going to do it. It's just there for show. And how they get this through is the NDAA, the purpose of it is to fund the Department of Defense for the upcoming year. And what they'll say is, well, if you don't vote for this, then you're not voting to support our troops. You're not voting for a strong country. You don't care about our country. You don't care about the troops, because this is how we have to fund them. And it's after they get done with the budget for the next year, they start sneaking all this stuff in there, and they can say, well, the main part of it's we're funding the Department of Defense. We're supporting the troops. How can you be against that? It overwhelmingly passed in the Senate today, 71 to 25. So there's 71 senators who do not have a problem with you being indefinitely detained without charge for no reason. Notable people voted for and against. Ted Cruz surprisingly voted against it. That kind of shocked me. Ron Wyden voted against it. Rand Paul voted against it. Barbara Boxer voted against it. Feinstein voted for it. Marco Rubio voted for it. So he's okay with you being indefinitely detained. So remember that when he's running in 2016, that Marco Rubio is completely fine with no charges being brought against you, but you still being indefinitely detained by the government. Also, I tell you what, let's just go ahead and get into the shootings here and try to dissect it a little bit. Dylan Roof went into a church last night and shot innocent people worshiping on Wednesday night. 9 people are now dead. There's a lot of rumor that, what happened, why did this happen? At the end of the day, we'll probably never know. What we do know, something that I find completely fascinating about it, is this shooting is eerily similar to so many of the shootings that we've dealt with throughout the years. The kid was on Suboxone, he got picked up today. Similar kind of, if you remember back how Timothy McVeigh got picked up, they found him, driving, and the cops just picked him up, and he's just like, okay, I'll go with you. Which is kind of odd. You would think that he would fight or, have killed himself, but he just... So that's kind of odd. And this monster kid, he was also on Xanax, according to some of his friends, and other drugs, and psychiatric drugs that are all legal in this country, mind you. We've had 35 school shootings over the past, couple of decades, and the shooters every single time were on these psychiatric drugs. That's absolutely a terrifying stat, and everybody wants to blame this and they want to blame that. First off, I think the thing you need to blame is somebody is pulling the trigger, and that person needs to be held responsible, obviously. But especially with Obama going on today and talking about, the gun laws, the gun laws, the gun laws. Well, there's people that have guns all over the country, and this kind of thing doesn't happen. And we talked about how the gun laws are working in Chicago at the beginning of the show. 1,149 people have been shot. And that's with strict gun laws. Do we want that in the rest of the country? No, I don't think so. But these psychiatric drugs, shooting in Tallahassee, Florida in 2014, Seattle, Washington, 2014, Connecticut, 2014, Nevada, 2013, Missouri, 2013. Every time they were on something. Columbine, the Aurora school shootings, when Gabby Giffords was shot, the shooter every single time, they all have something in common. They're all on these psychiatric drugs. And I don't understand why that's not something that people feel that needs to be addressed. But it's time that somebody addresses that and say, why are we shoving pills down our kids' throats? And it's clearly, does more harm than good in a lot of cases. I know if I had children, they would in no way, shape, or form would I ever, ever, ever give my kids anything like that. I know I certainly wouldn't take it. And yet, and it's so weird too. The kid, he's got this, this. Think about Sandy Hook, the way that kid looked, and James Holmes with the Aurora shooting, and Lautner in Arizona. They all just have this crazy, bizarre, I'm not all there look. And a lot of people want to attest that to, well, these people are just crazy. And obviously, these people are nuts. They're monsters and they're nuts that are going around killing people. But at the same time, you have to say, where does that look come from? Why do they have that crazy look in their eye? Where is that coming from? So, we have to deal with this problem. We have to we can't keep sweeping the problem under the rug, and that's unfortunately what's happening. People want to use it for this agenda and that agenda, these killings, and that's sick. When politicians want to come out and politicize these issues immediately, and the bodies aren't even cold yet. It's ridiculous that they're so quick to push their agenda, and then they go through and pass the NDAA today while nobody's paying attention. To me, I don't trust the government for any reason whatsoever, and I have a hard time believing really anything they tell me at all. Absolutely. It just makes me sick. The whole thing makes me absolutely sick. I don't know what we're supposed to do. We need to get rid of the politicians that we have. We need to get rid of, some people blame the system. The system's clearly screwed up. But what do? We have to start somewhere. Nobody's marching in the streets over this. And, more violence isn't going to stop violence. And that's something that I think a lot of people are confused about. I mean, it's, I wish it would. If there was one answer, whatever that answer is, but that's not going to solve anything. That's not going to work. The only way that we do this is we take the power back away from these politicians. And we have to address these issues completely head on. So we're trying to get a guest on here. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties with the phones tonight. For anybody that's interested, if you do want to call in tonight and we get this working, please feel free at 718-717-8296. Area code 718-717-8296. And as always, join us 5 nights a week on ucy.tv/TAMR. But let's get back into what we're talking about here. Do all these kids need to be on these prescription drugs? I mean, do you think there's something more nefarious going on here? I wish that I could say. I wish that I had answers for all this, but unfortunately I don't. I don't know if many people do right now. We just know what the answers are not, and that's unfortunately where they keep the paths they keep trying to pursue. I'm going to bring on the line right now one of our wonderful writers, Carrie Wedler. How are you doing tonight, Carrie?
I'm doing okay. How about you?
Doing fantastic. So what are your thoughts on the whole Charleston shooting, just everything that's going on in the news right now?
Well, it's an unbelievably sad situation. For me, it's particularly sad because if you look back to the 1960s, say like the church burning that happened, it seems like very little progress has been made, whether institutionally or societally. And so I guess like what upsets me most, I mean, the fact that these people were doing something so positive, regardless of what you think about religion, like they were praying, they were trying to do something based in love. And the fact that they were killed in that kind of a situation, I think is all the more disturbing and all the more of a commentary on modern American society. But I think the hardest thing for me to swallow is the way that the entire thing is being portrayed, because yes, it is a hate crime. Yes, this guy is a disgusting racist, but I think there's a very big double standard between what the state and what institutions are willing to accept as violence. So yes, America has accepted that hate crimes are wrong and racism is bad, and the United States has allegedly legislated against this with things like the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, but at the end of the day, I mean, they're not going to call it terrorism, and I think that's what it is. And I won't ramble into that. I'll let you decide when you want to talk about that. But yes, it's a hate crime. I think it's a mass shooting, which hasn't been thrown around too much in the mainstream headlines, and it's also terrorism.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think all those words definitely apply to the situation. For me personally, I don't get worked up in the definitions of what people call things. I know that it's just monstrous and it's horrendous. And there's a lot of people that get really worked up and say, well, you have to call it this, you have to call it a hate crime. When it's like, well, what murder's not hate crime? How many love murders have we had this week? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So to me, it's a completely despicable act by a cowardly, horrible person. And
yeah.
And when you want to get wrapped up, to me personally, when you get wrapped up in the definition of things, you're missing the complete point here. There's 9 dead lives, and people are arguing over verbiage.
Well, I totally agree. And I mean, at the end of the day, whether you're a terrorist or you're a mass shooter or you're a hate criminal, like you said, like it's all violence. It's all coming from a place of anger and hate, misunderstanding, whatever you want to call it. The only reason I think that it is important, and of course it's not going to happen, the mainstream isn't going to suddenly call this white guy with blue eyes and blonde hair a terrorist, like that's never going to happen. But I think rather than bothering with labeling it, what's more important is the discussion about what it hasn't been labeled. We don't have to label it. It's murder. Fine, that's what it is, Like I'm not terribly concerned with labeling it. However, like, why is it that this person committed murder, just like the people in, I believe it was Garland tried to do. It was Garland City where they had the free speech, the quote-unquote free speech John Muhammad thing. I believe that was the name.
Yeah.
They were immediately called terrorists. And in fact, they weren't even called terrorists because the propaganda is so effective now that all they had to call them were extremists and militants and Muslim, and the public filled in the blank. They never... And that was the thing there, is the sheriff said, we're not going to call this terrorism, but they didn't have to. But the reason I mention it is really because at the end of the day, yes, this is a hate crime. Yes, it's based in racism. But my argument is that in 2015, racism is inextricable from politics because racism has been perpetuated through politics. This is nothing new. But I think especially with the conversation of police brutality and the police state, this racism has really been codified, whether we're talking about the drug war or we're talking about officers getting away with murder and the justice system excusing it, or we're talking about racist people who endorse all of these things and are thus further institutionalizing the racism. And so for me, like, yes, if we're getting technical, it's terrorism because it is a political aim. Like, tell me that this guy in Charleston didn't hear about the Walter Scott shooting and was pissed off that the guy was charged with murder. Like, chances are that if you're someone who hates black people so much that you're going to go into a church and shoot them up in the name of whatever the hell your beliefs are, like, you're aware of the climate going on in your city and you are siding with police. When it comes to a black man versus a police officer, you're going to pick the police officer. And so I think that it's undeniably political, but at the end of the day, like you said, it doesn't really matter what we label it because it's just a perpetuation of violence and extremely unfortunate hatred.
Absolutely. And one thing that I agree with you on is that, you know, they do use these words, though, in other circumstances just to create fear. And they're quick to throw the word terrorism around. And I don't think it's because they say, oh, this person's a terrorist. They use it to generate fear among the public. When you hear that word, there's a trigger that goes off inside of you, and you're automatically scared. And another thing about this shooting, too, that me and my wife were talking about this earlier today, how you can't go anywhere now without having something in the back of your head. And it was like, church was like the last box that needed to be checked off because you can't send your kids to school without being scared there's going to somebody shoot them up. You can't go to a movie theater, a public place. You can't get on an airplane without wondering if somebody's going to drill it into the side of a building. And kind of the last sacred place, no pun intended, was church.
Oh, totally. And unfortunately, you know, I think, like, as you were talking about, you know, designations of labels, whatever, but I think it doesn't fit into the American establishment narrative to be calling this guy a terrorist. You know, he's, by any other standard, if no one knew that he had murdered a bunch of black people, he looks and probably acts like a red-blooded American who loves his country and, you know, abides by all these values and who exercises his right to his Second Amendment, you know, guarantees because he's walking around with a gun. And it's just, like you said, it's just one more thing to be afraid of, except the establishment doesn't want anyone to be afraid of white Americans that love their military and wave their flags. You know, that's not a threat to them. The threat is the people who are being murdered, the people who are sort of standing up to all of these institutional establishments. So I think I lost my train of thought because my dog was barking. But yeah, at the end of the day, all this is really doing and what the media is capitalizing on is the fact that it's generating fear. It's just another reason for people to cling to their beliefs and to reinforce stereotypes, whatever they may be, whether it's, well, those black people deserve to die because they're riling up the communities and killing cops, or whether it's the flip side of that. And either way, it's just unfortunate that a tragedy like this that should really be paused for people to go like, wait, why do we hate each other? Why are we killing each other? Why are we so negative? Why are we so hateful? That's not happening. Instead, people are just more afraid, and they're going to turn to the institutions that are perpetuating this racism and this injustice and this inequality to solve it.
Oh, absolutely.
Go ahead.
Absolutely. Like I was scrolling through different social media stuff today, just looking at people's reactions, and it's generating more hate. I mean, there were so many people that I saw that were just like, you know, I'm just completely tired of white people. All white people need to die, blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of similar to what we see in the Middle East. It's we go over there and we bomb and we create all this violence. And they don't respond with, oh, let's all get along. They respond with, I'm going to kill you now. And that's what it seems like is happening. It's just generating more hate and more fear, and it's getting worse and worse and worse.
Well, and I'm glad, go ahead.
Well, to me, though, we should be completely in the opposite direction. We should be, you know, running towards love and the right thing, and yet we're just running towards hate and division.
Oh, I totally agree, and I'm glad that you mentioned, you know, going abroad and using violence, because at the end of the day, someone who's so demented and so indoctrinated with whatever propaganda lines he's heard his whole life, like, he's going to go shoot up a bunch of innocent people who aren't doing anything, and no, this wasn't an act of police brutality. Of course not. But it is a reflection of how much racism has been institutionalized. And my point, and why I'm glad you brought up the foreign policy, is that things like this happening, whether it's police brutality or crazy racists feeling that they're entitled to go kill a bunch of people, like the tensions in society right now are a consequence of a much bigger machine, of that war machine, of the federal government, of all of these establishments, I keep saying that word, but all these institutions that are perpetuating the policies that make things so bad, And so it's really frustrating to see that these things aren't, they aren't being talked about in any substantive way. And no one's going to talk about the connection of violence in America to violence abroad, but I'm a firm believer that if you have institutions, you have government, you have all of the people that are allegedly moral and here to help the people, if you have them perpetuating violence, then you're going to have a violent society. If you have a society that accepts that kind of violence, they're probably going to be violent too. So it's like this endless feedback loop of continued violence, and there's never a solution, and it's just continued fear, which is the last thing we need.
It absolutely is. And, when you subconsciously people look up to the government, and I don't think even it's so subconsciously sometimes, because we do see people that are defending, the cops when it's Walter Scott and it's just a guy getting shot in the back, and we see how people are just trained just to whatever the government says or does, they agree with it, and then we have to see how the government handles all these situations. Mm-hmm. And they handle it with violence. That's how they handle all their problems. If you don't pay a ticket, they're going to come to your house and there's going to be violence. Mm-hmm. If you do something that they're not supposed to do overseas, there's going to be violence involved. And that's the example that's set for us. I saw today they were interviewing, I believe it was a state representative or state senator of South Carolina, and he seemed like he was a very good church-going man. He appeared to be, a good Christian man. I don't know the guy. I have no idea if it was for TV or not. You know how politicians are. And I thought it was just incredible that a man that was saying he's a Christian, because me personally, I am a Christian, and I'm against violence in all way, shape, or form, period. Mm-hmm. And he's like, we need to get the death penalty on this kid. It's like, wait a second. Wait. You're upset because, he killed 9 people, as you well should be, but your response is, let's kill him. More violence.
Oh, totally. And, to be, upfront, I'm completely detached from the left or the right. I think each has its own problems and its own endorsements of violence equally. But what really is funny to me, and rather really just more sad and depressing, is that the people who are the ones pushing for the death penalty or the foreign policy or to defend the cops, these are the ones who also believe that they're for limited government. These are the people who will spout magnificent talking points about how the government is not to be trusted and about how you can't trust them to handle healthcare. You can't trust them to, X, Y, or Z, to do anything because they're so corrupt and they're so evil and they're so scandalous and so incompetent. And yet they're the first ones to endorse the government doing anything, especially things that involve violence, which is like, if you're that skeptical of government, are you sure you want to be giving them the authority of life and death, like as a basic foundation of their power? Like, it blows my mind that people are so propagandized and so tied into what they've been fed their whole lives that they don't see the contradiction in their belief.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you missed the very beginning of the show, but I started out with this. I found this out about 30 minutes before coming on the air. Okay, the Rahm Emanuel quote says, never let a serious tragedy go to waste, something like that. I'm paraphrasing what he said. Today, the NDAA for 2016 passed.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, and I thought that was just kind of amazing. And also, we had the Trade Promotion Authority, which grants Obama access. We talked about that at the beginning of the show, too, but I mean, the NDA, that's a big deal. And not a word.
Well, what's funny to me is, and I believe I read this, don't quote me because I could be wrong, and I'll be the first to admit if I am, but I believe I read somewhere that the new NDAA is what contains the new ban on torture. The Senate implemented like a provision of that NDAA as a ban on torture. And what's so frustrating to me is like, well, yeah, that's great, but did you leave in the indefinite detention clause? So it's like, even if the government does something right, it's like it's like a sinking ship, and you stick your finger in one hole to stop the the flooding, and then another hole opens up, so it's like, fine, they're going to be on torture, but well, they're still reserving their right to indefinitely detain you and violate your basic human rights. So is it a victory? Like, I can't really call it one, even though it's good that detainees, maybe might not, or perhaps might less be, or be tortured less, although I really don't think the CIA cares what laws the Congress passes. But yeah, that's all well and good. But if the implication of the law at the end of the day is increased military spending, which it always is, that's the point. The National Defense Authorization Act. They don't pass it to indefinitely detain us. They pass it to perpetuate the war machine, and that's a byproduct. It's like a special bonus they get because as they're approving all this military spending, well, cool, they can oppress us too. So,
yeah. And that's what I was saying. That's how they get this through, and that's how they pass this kind of stuff. Is they basically said but we're just funding the military. Don't you love the troops? We're just funding the military. We want to be safe, don't we? And, in the fine print, it's, we're going to do whatever we want to, you're screwed.
Yeah, well, and it's like, didn't you say you were, like, fighting for the Constitution and all these wars are legal, and then you're going to call us unpatriotic and just, like, hateful Muslim lovers if we start to, like, sort of represent the Constitution that is allegedly supposed to be represented by all these laws Congress passes? And, I'm not a constitutionalist, but most people in this country consider themselves strict adherents to the Constitution, whether it's a broad interpretation or a strict one. And so it's funny that the government is, like, so dedicated to our freedom and to helping us and to giving us liberty, and yet the second anyone starts to stand up for those qualities, they're labeled anti-American. Yeah,
it's bizarre. And for me, I wouldn't call myself a constitutional. I wouldn't say I'm not. I don't, I'm just.
I mean, it's cool. It's just outdated.
For me, it's just like, I think everybody should be free and just, not hurt people. And pretty much other than that, we have freedom to pursue our own lives and our own interests. But at the same time, I think if we actually did adhere to the Constitution, we would be a lot better off than, going around it how they do.
I mean, I'm sure you've heard the Lysander Spooner quote of, like, whether the Constitution be one thing or another, it's either failed to stop the things that have happened or it's enabled it. That's to paraphrase the quote. But, I mean, at the end of the day, yes, the Constitution is great. It was I was going to say absolutely or unbelievably both, absolutely and unbelievably revolutionary in its time. In 1781 or 91, whenever they solidified it, the Declaration of Independence for that matter too, like, they were both, like, monumental things that happened that affected the whole world. Like, if America hadn't had the revolution, the French may not have. If the French Revolution hadn't happened, like, global revolutions wouldn't have happened. It was an extremely transformative time in history, but at the end of the day, it was just sort of an evolution away from monarchy, which was away from feudalism. And I think that, yeah, the Constitution is really nice and it's great, but politicians have been violating it since it was ratified. And we've had how many years of corruption? Like, it's amazing to me. Like, I love reading Mark Twain quotes about politics because they are still completely accurate. And so it's just sort of this consistency of pattern, and of action and habit that governments tend towards that make the Constitution sort of I don't want to say useless, because it is a very revolutionary document and it's fantastic. And it's gotten me to the point where I can, evolve past the idea of a constitution. However, it still was written 300 and some years ago, and we're still where we are today. So that's my thing with the Constitution.
I think it's important, though, to remember, too, it's just a sheet of paper. And it's words on a sheet of paper, and at the end of the day, it's up to the people that here are alive on this planet and the people that are in the government and really everybody, because everybody should be more involved. It's how they handle themselves and how they interact and the laws that are passed and that whole thing. And it's about what's going on today. It's not, we can't blame everything, or we can't, say that it's the greatest thing ever because it's just a sheet of paper.
Right.
When it's everybody here today and nobody wants to take responsibility, like, well, the Constitution says, it's like, so?
Well, that's another problem with the Constitution, is that, like, the American flag or the Pledge of Allegiance or all of these relics of American identity, it's been totally manipulated. Like, politicians talk about the Constitution all the time. Do they follow it? Not at all. But they pretend like they do. And it's just another tool to manipulate people into believing that they're free, or believing there's still some semblance of freedom in America. And yes, like, America is more free than Saudi Arabia, but I mean, Saudi Arabia is our ally. So at the end of the day, the Constitution really means nothing. It doesn't matter how many countries America invades and, like, helps them write a little constitution up, because the corruption continues. dictators are still being installed by the American government around the world. So, like you said, it's a sheet of paper, and it's a really lofty, brilliant sheet of paper, but I don't expect sociopathic politicians to revere it any more than they revere the sanctity of human life.
No, absolutely. And you talked about how, that they've been breaking the Constitution since, it's been ratified. It's the problems that we're facing today, that they're not these new problems that crept up a couple years ago with, some people blame all Obama or some people blame all George Bush. These are problems that we've been dealing with for decades and decades and decades. If you go listen to, like you were talking about Mark Twain, about they could have been from today. You talk about Smedley Butler, his quotes, that could have been from today. Eisenhower, when he was leaving office, that speech could have been today.
I mean, Thoreau, I've been reading Civil Disobedience, and every single problem that he articulates, it's such an amazing essay, but it's all still accurate. And he was writing in the 19th century, same as Mark Twain. Like, it's so consistent, and you can read pieces of work from ancient Greece and they still apply. So what does that say? Exactly.
But again, it's people blame what's in front of them at the moment.
Exactly. It's short attention spans.
Exactly. And I think that's something, and we've talked a lot about the upcoming election and how it's, not going to solve anything. And so many people, especially the people that hate Obama. Okay, that's, for instance, people hated George Bush. Everything's going to be so much better. Everything's going to be great. We're going to get this guy in there. Look, everything's the same, if not worse. And it's going to happen again.
Well, and the crazy thing is the people who hated George Bush still hate George Bush just as much. We're almost done with the Obama presidency, and they're still blaming George Bush. And when a Republican comes in, if it is a Republican, Republicans are going to be sitting around blaming Obama for all of this Republicans' problems. If he goes and bombs Iran and reinvades Iraq, who upstates Ted Cruz, whoever the hell it's going to be, I don't know. I'm trying not to follow the national elections, but if they go and they destroy a country, and as the CIA has defined blowback, a rash of terrorism erupts in the United States because this Republican, it's a hypothetical Republican president has caused so many problems. The average Republican voter is still going to sit around and say, well, it's because we didn't invade fast enough. Obama wouldn't invade. And now we've been overwhelmed with all of the backlash because we waited so long to invade. And so it's just like, no matter what, people will find an excuse to maintain their beliefs. And that's what we're up against.
Look at Iraq right now. ISIS exists. This is what everybody says. ISIS exists because we left Iraq and it caused a vacuum, blah, blah, blah. And what they're overlooking is, well, where did all the training for ISIS come from? Where did all the financial means, where did all the weapons come from? They didn't just magically fall out of the sky. So much of the funding came from Saudi Arabia, our great ally. The training happened in Syria. The weapons were left behind from Iraq, and they just went and picked them up like it's a video game.
Oh, totally. And it's like, what also blows my mind is so much of this is conspiracy, and I'm not saying like it's conspiracy theory, but like it is the government conspiring to create false demons and to create fears when there are none. But it's also just utter incompetency on the part of the government. They lose millions of dollars of weapons. They burn them. Like, they're so wasteful. And this is just the general, characteristic of government. But that's also what just scares me so much, is not only are the people in charge violent and sociopathic, they're also totally incompetent. So we have these people who are running around with all of these motives to kill people and to convince people that those people need killing, and they can't even manage to do that efficiently.
Oh, absolutely. We had on the show here last week, one of my great friends since I was a kid, Kelvin Jones. He was in Iraq 3 times, and he said, yeah, when we left, we just left everything. He's like, we just left all this stuff just sitting around.
Well, yeah, because the taxpayer subsidized it. Nobody gives a shit. There's no accountability. It doesn't matter if they leave it. There was a story. There's a great book. It's called Why Peace. It's like 600 pages, and one of the essays in it really explored the Vietnam War and the military-industrial complex. And I believe it was a military official. I don't want to say for sure. It was either a general or someone whoever it was, they were testifying in front of Congress. There was a hearing about some of the misconduct that had gone on there. And one of the things that happened that isn't really widely known, I know I didn't read about it in my public school history textbook, is that they bombed Laos. Like, yeah, we know about Cambodia, but they were also bombing Laos. And someone asked, well, like, why were you mining the rice fields? Like, why did you just drop, like, people are still dying from these landmines today. Like, they're still dying. And the general's answer was, well, we had extra and we didn't know what to do with them. That's it. Like, that to me is the summary of American foreign policy right now. Let's kill people because we bought these products because we're feeding the military industrial complex. So let's just go kill a bunch of people. It doesn't matter because it's more important to us to get rid of the inventory to be able to justify buying more than it is to respect human life.
I mean, I've never heard that before. My jaw is just on the ground right now. That's unbelievable.
I'll find the book and send you the name of the article because it like broke my heart reading that. You know, it's like, at the end of the day, we're already cynical. Like, clearly we are. To be doing what we are doing, we have to be a little cynical. You know, like, I'm an optimist. I think that things are going to turn out okay for humanity. However, right now, we have to be cynical. It's to not be cynical is to be totally irrational. But, I mean, even that just solidified all of my suspicions and my sort of trend toward cynicism. And that was a couple of years ago that I first read that. And I just went like, like, there are people who exist who are running the world who think like that. Yeah,
but, I mean, think about the mentality you would have to achieve those types of powers. I mean, there's a reason sociopaths get in position of power. It's because you have to be striving for that. Very, very, very rarely are you finding people that want to get in these positions because they really want to help and make a difference. And then even in the case where there are the people that do want to help and make a difference, so many times they get into the system and then people start trying to buy them off and, you know, money's lucrative and then you know, they become corrupted.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the same thing goes for any other level of government. So whether it's the police or whether it's like someone becomes like a public defender, you know, because they want to help the people who have been screwed over by the system, and they get in there and they're just torn down because they see how deep the corruption goes. Same thing for police. And it's like, I'm not going to pretend like I have the solution to this. It's just extremely upsetting, though, you know, just to see the level of corruption, like the depth of it, like how far it goes, like how deep it goes. Like, the system is rotten to its core. Like, no part of the system is really operating for anyone. And when it is, those are just sort of like sprinkles on top. You know, it's like the bone they throw to the peasants. Like, they're not really helping people. They're just like almost maybe kind of helping them get by, but only so much that they can propagandize that to then masquerade as a force of good.
Well, see, you know, for them, it's funny because we'll take, for example, Jeb Bush, and he's coming up and he's talking about how, you know, if he becomes president, things are going to be really great and wonderful and fantastic, you know, and looking back on like his brother's presidency and yada, yada, yada. When you think about it, he's almost not lying because for him and his family, it is going to be great and wonderful. Yeah. They're going to make a bunch of money and do whatever they want. Yeah. It's just all of us that are screwed. You know, he didn't say it's going to be great for everybody, but it is going to be great for them. So I guess he's kind of not lying. But then, too, you get somebody like Lindsey Graham that's so blatant as to say, well, if you don't want to go to war, you probably shouldn't vote for me.
Oh, my gosh. And he's comfortable saying that. And there are people who hear that, and they're like, oh, yeah, I'm going to vote for him. Like,
who's voting for that guy?
I mean, I don't know anyone, but I bet you do. I bet you know someone, and you just don't know that they're supporting him.
Nobody's voting for Lindsey Graham. His own family members would not vote for him.
Well, but that's the thing. That's what's so scary is that, like, the climate is such that he can say things like that, and it's okay. Like, yes, I'm sure MSNBC had a segment calling him out about that, you know, because they pander to their base, and the left is still traditionally opposed to war, even though they make excuses for Obama and whatever. That's well and good. But at the end of the day, I mean, the government in general, these establishments are so, you know, on one hand, they're not transparent at all. They're hiding everything. But on the other hand, it's like, I remember growing up, and my mom, I remember my mom talking to me about the Nazis. Like, we have family that died in the Holocaust years ago. I never met him, obviously, but we were having a conversation, and she goes, yeah, I mean, the Nazis were so evil, and they were so cold about it. They kept records of everything they did. Like, they were proud of it. And, like, for some reason that stuck out to me. I remembered it. And now, you know, being a researcher, doing all this work, like, reading all these government files, it's the exact same thing. so much of what the government does that's absolutely heinous is just public record. You can go read the files and read the documents, and they're not even ashamed of it. Like, they just publicize it and just assume correctly that no one's going to go read it, no one cares. And, like, yes, they do keep things secret. There's the FISA courts. There are all of these things that we don't even know about. So the tiny little fraction of things we do know about that they are making public to us are so despicable that it just, like, terrifies me to think about the things that aren't going to be revealed for another 50 years or until the empire falls.
Exactly. So we were talking about this the other night when we were talking about the McCain bill, you know, the amendment to the NDAA about, you know, they're going to stop torture, blah, blah, blah. Sure they are. But, you know, all these black sites, and we were debating, are they really filing paperwork for some of these black sites? Like, that, right. I can't even imagine that they would. Why would you do that? Like, do you really need to, like, document it on a sheet of paper? Well, we sexually molested this guy today. Like, right. Mm-hmm. Does that need to be recorded? Like, how much is going on that we'll never know about?
Well, exactly. And that's sort of one of the things, like, I may be veering off topic right now, but I think that's something that, I mean, eventually we're going to know it. You and I may be dead by the time all the records come out. Like, let's be reasonable and realistic. But there's this great movie. It's called The Lives of Others. It's a German film, and it takes place during, like, when the Stasi was in power in the 80s, like right around the time of the fall of the Soviet Union. And I don't want to ruin it, but there's a point at the end where one of the main characters is able to go and look at the spy records that were kept on him. And I've just realized I'm quoting a movie right now, so it's like obviously not. I can't confirm that it's factual, but I have heard of that, of people being able to go back and see what was kept on them. And it's just so scary to think. I mean, I'm not even scared anymore. I'm not going to say it's scary. You know, like, to use a good term, yeah, it's scary. But it's mind-boggling to think of all the records they have and all the crimes they've committed. And like you said, the ones they're not even recording. Because it's like, yeah, what CIA agent is, like, really concerned with producing accountability and keeping up with the system so that the Government Accountability Office or the Inspector General can go and make a really informed report for the American public that isn't even going to read it, and the report won't even be covered by the mainstream media. Like, these people know that they don't, I want, not that they don't owe us anything, but they know that they're not obligated to perform any service for us, and that's not their objective. And like you said, yes, there are people who really do want to help, but they're totally stymied by the I can't think of the word right now. It's like a physics word, but they cannot make any change.
Yeah, and think about all the files that are, you know, declined from the FOIA, from the Freedom of Information Act, and they say, well, we can't find it. Sorry, we never saw that.
Right.
Or when they do release something, everything's just completely redacted out. Like, and then when they do finally get around to releasing this stuff, it's like you said, we're going to be all dead. I know with, like, the Kennedy assassination stuff, there's still so much that has not been released. And the Warren Commission said, okay, well, you know, all this stuff's going to get released in 75 years. And, and for them, it's like their thinking is we're all going to be dead by then, so who cares what they find out?
Of course. I mean, I can't think of any other reason why they wouldn't publicize it. Yeah, like, why? For our safety? For public safety? That's like a pretty good excuse to fall back on that they use quite a lot.
Well, that's their answer for everything, and I believe there is probably truth in that, because if the people really knew what was going on, they would be in the streets, and the people that were doing all this stuff, their safety would probably be in jeopardy.
Exactly. No, totally. And they're fully aware of that. I mean, I need to verify this claim myself, but Justin King, one of our amazing writers and investigative journalists, has told me that the reason the government even passed the Civil Rights Act is because they knew that people were getting extremely upset and that they were less and less willing to sit around passively, and that people were going to start killing cops and that it was going to create unrest. And I do need to research that. Anyone who's listening, Google it yourself. And if I'm wrong, then you can laugh at me. I'm going to Google it after we get off the show. But if that is the case, I'm not surprised at all.
Nothing on this planet makes me madder than hearing someone praise Lyndon Johnson because he passed the Civil Rights Bill. It's like, do you not understand that he did that for political reasons and that he did not care whatsoever about that bill, that he wasn't some great man that stood up for civil rights? It was politically motivated, and the Kennedys were going to get it through, and he just had to finish what they had started because people would have hated him. That's it.
Yeah, and yet I took a class in college. It was only 1960s U.S. history. And I sat and listened to a teacher praise Lyndon B. Johnson and make excuses for him and say that he was just so horribly heartbroken by all of the carnage he caused in Vietnam. And like, yeah, maybe that's true. Maybe he had a delayed conscience awakening, and he went, oh my God, I'm an evil person. But at the end of the day, like, why are we still glorifying these people? Like, for me, if they did anything that caused the death of human life, if they did anything that compromised principle or just like basic human decency, I don't care what they did that was good. Like, yeah, I can acknowledge objectively that yes, maybe it helped. Yes, maybe it had positive side effects. But at the end of the day, I've been told by my mother that I'm too black and white, but I'm sorry, I can't say that I like Lyndon B. Johnson because he helped black people. Because at the end of the day, what has changed? It's 2015. Jim Crow turned into the drug war, and nothing's different. Legislation, piece of paper. What does it do? Because there's still racism in America. Cops are still killing black people and a ton of other people without any accountability. So I just don't see how passing legislation or abiding by the Constitution is really going to change things. I think it's a much more conscious shift that isn't really tangible in the government arena because the government, as we've discussed, is inherently violent. And so I just don't see peace coming from a violent institution.
I think you're absolutely right about what you just said. I think one reason that the Civil Rights Bill was important is it was kind of saying publicly for the first time, okay, we're going to put all this, we're going to actually start trying to treat people equally, at least to your face, and what we do behind your back's none of your business, kind of a thing.
Right.
And they were acknowledging the situation, but again, just the fact that they use Lyndon Johnson as some savior.
Right. And that's the thing is I'm sure that there were Congress people who passed that law because they believed in it. And they felt that it was their obligation, as public servants, to be passing legislation that asserted that humans have the same rights, and I'm not saying that that wasn't consequential, that wasn't significant. I'm just saying that maybe that's all it was. Like, maybe it was just a really nice statement on things, because the oppression continued. And it's great that even passed, and I think to an extent it may have helped change attitudes. For a certain segment of the population, they went, well, it's law now, so all right, I guess it's not so bad. However, racism still exists. And I think the problem is that, government can't change mentalities. They can't
Bingo.
change.
That's what I was about to say. A piece of paper can't change somebody's heart.
Exactly.
And if you have hate in your heart, you can pass all the bills in the world. That's not going to stop people from hating.
Exactly.
So,
and if anything, forcing people to try to change, I think, is only going to exacerbate the hate. Like, look at what happened with the whole Religious Freedom Act. There were a bunch of Christians who were totally pissed off that they were going to have to serve gay people. Or, sorry, I'm mixing up my stories, but forget I said anything about an actual bill. But there were a bunch of Christian people who were pissed off that they were, that they perceived that they were being forced to serve people when they didn't want to, when that went against their religious beliefs. And I highly doubt that all of those bigots were like, you know what, the government said that I should serve gay people, so I think I'm going to do it now, and maybe they're not so bad and Jesus loves them. That's not what happened. Right. They were like, man, you know what, fuck the government and fuck these gay people for trying to use the government to make me do things.
It creates resentment among people a lot of the times.
Totally, exactly.
Because, when people hate, and there's no legislation that's going to stop people from hating, and there's no legislation that's going to stop people from killing. It's like, look at the drug war. And, it goes back to the gun laws. It's like, well, Chicago, great gun laws. 1,149 people have been shot so far in Chicago this year. Mm-hmm. And it's the drug war. Well, drugs are illegal. Guess what? Everybody's still getting them. So your laws are meaningless.
Well, of course. And speaking of gun control and speaking of gun laws and talking about the Civil Rights Act, one of the main reasons that the 1968 Crime and Omnibus, I think it's Crime Control and Safe Streets Act, Omnibus, it has an omnibus in it. One of the reasons it was passed was because of the riots of the 1960s, where black people were like, you know what, fuck this. And they brought out their guns and they started fighting back, and the riots were happening. And that's when the state sort of went like, oops, we didn't solve that problem quick enough. Let's take away their guns. And then a few years later, they instituted the drug war. So now blacks are disarmed and incarcerated, and here we are today.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you think, from your point of view, what do we do to solve this? What do we do to fix it? What's the positive change we can make?
Well, I will say, especially for our generation, that all studies show that our generation is a lot less attached to labels and to identity politics, and we're a lot more tolerant. And so I think a lot of this problem is going to solve itself. Obviously, we need to be active. We need to be speaking out. We need to be actually creating communities that accept people and really fostering these values. But I also think that at the end of, sorry, I totally, what am I saying? I'm sorry. I've been up for so.
Nonsense.
Oh yeah, no. I think that a lot of this is just the evolution of humanity. And there's, in that same book that I was telling you about, the Laos incident with the military, it's called Why Peace, if anyone wants to read it. It's a huge, amazing compilation of essays about why peace is preferable. But there's a really great essay in there by a Stanford professor, might have been Berkeley, I think it's Stanford, who had examined the use of force among humans across several centuries and found that the trend of violence is reducing, that people are finding better ways to interact and to solve conflict than just killing each other. So maybe in the year 900, if somebody, took your loaf of bread, you would cut their head off. But that's not how we do things anymore. And you're going to still, what are you going to say?
I was going to make a Game of Thrones reference. Just go ahead.
Yeah, okay, I don't watch it. I know I should, but I don't. It's
You
too violent.
shouldn't. You shouldn't.
It's too violent.
You're not missing anything.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's sort of just the long-term trend of history and humanity that people are becoming more peaceful. It's especially beneficial that our generation is so connected because of the internet, and we are so much more tolerant and so much more independent. I think all these things are just happening as it is, but it is our responsibility to be raising awareness about it and to be trying to engage the people that are really perpetuating it. I have one of my projects, my side projects from Anti-Media, my audience is all right-wing Republicans. And it's been a great challenge for me because I have to figure out how to articulate peace and tolerance to people who need to hear it most. So I think by reaching people that are really the most hateful, 9 out of 10 of them aren't going to listen, but one of them might start to question things. One of them might go, oh, I never thought of it in that way. And then from then on, everything else they hear that might have reinforced propaganda, they may start to question. And I'm not tooting my own horn because I have no idea how many neocons agree with me. I can't say. I'm not too optimistic, but I'm grateful to have the opportunity to speak to them and to really engage them. We can preach to the choir all we want, and we can talk about how screwed up the Constitution is and about how people are propagandized, but if we're not reaching out to the people that are consenting to these policies, not just us, because at the end of the day, we're consenting. We're sitting here, living here,
Right.
We pay the minimal taxes that we have to, but we're still abiding by it. But I'm talking about people that really consent to the system, enthusiastically consent. These are the ones we need to be engaging, and that's my goal.
I think Ron Paul, he was very important in that because I think there were a lot of people that were Democrats. I think there were a lot of people that were Republicans and, had voted for Obama in 2008. And there were people that, supported Bush at the time. And I think somebody like him coming along said, things don't have to be this way. There is a different way to do things.
Right.
And I think he kind of did exactly what you said, especially running as a Republican, changed a lot of minds and kind of opened up the eyes of a lot of people. And now it's, just taking it to the next step.
Exactly. And what is that next step? I think it's kind of decentralized, which is cool. I don't think there is a certain regimen we can practice to make sure that we all have peace and freedom and we stop the government. I think that everyone has to do it in their own way. People can have conversations that are totally unique to them. And one of the things I've talked about with a lot of activists is that everyone finds the message of freedom or peace, whatever you want to call it, through things that are specific to them. So, for example, I have a friend who's a chef. And when my political friend and I, when we first met her, she wasn't engaged in politics at all. But we started talking to her about the food industry and about Monsanto and about the subsidies and about all the regulations that are passed to favor Monsanto and all the corruption. And now she's fully conscious about politics too. You find something that someone can identify with, no matter what it is, whether it's exercise or the environment or whatever gets them going, whatever makes them care. And then you use that as a jumping off point to talk about the broader picture and how the issue that they're most passionate about is affected by this broader picture. Absolutely.
I completely agree with that. We've got just a couple of minutes here. Do you have any parting words for everyone?
Peace and love, and try not to get too down about how bad things are, because I know it's really bad, but if we reduce ourselves to that level of negativity, we can't make a change. So do yoga and meditate. That's what I have to say. And that includes you too, SM.
Oh my gosh, nonsense. Well, thank you so much for calling in tonight and joining the show. My thoughts, especially to everyone out there and the families in Charleston and that whole situation. And what Carrie said, peace and love to everybody. Thank you all so much. Anti-Media Radio. Join the Vaughn tomorrow night, and we will be back next week. Have a good evening, everybody.
I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go.